So it's great to have you all with us today, and thank you for joining us. We're going to interview Barbara in a moment, but it's not, it's going to be a lecture. We are going to ask questions and also take part in an experiment that will illustrate the capabilities of our working memory. So stay focused, don't check your WhatsApp, be with us, stay tuned, so we can take part in this experience. Barbara, thank you so much for being here today. You probably heard it so many times, but once we published the details about the event today, we found that you are like a rock star here in Israel with so many fans, and people feel that they have, that they know you personally and are emotionally attached because of your amazing course, Learning How to Learn, and they felt that they must see you in person. So thank you so much for agreeing to spend time with us today. Your interview for today is Talia Kolodny, who will ask you probably around 5 questions, and we'll have this experiment. But dear participants, you can also ask a question or two. So write down your questions in the chat during the session. I already got some interesting questions before we even started. So one of these 2 questions will be presented towards the end of the session. And thank you, Talia, for taking the moderation of this meeting. Talia is an educator, a social innovator, a speaker, and a digital learning consultant. She has over a decade of experience in creating and directing cutting-edge programs and initiatives with leading educational organizations in Israel and around the world, such as Coursera, Khan Academy, and here in Israel, Digital Israel, Israel Digitalית, JDC, The Joint, Mandel Foundation, Karen Mandel, and various edtech startups. So thank you so much, Talia, for your assistance today. And I wish us all to learn something new today. Talia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it sounds like a huge team that's behind this event. And Barb, it's so wonderful to reconnect with you here today. I almost feel like we're having this living room conversation with a few hundred guests that are here with us in our living room in each of our homes. So thank you for being here with us today. Oh, and before we dive into the really hard questions, something that always strikes me about your background is that it's so diverse and you have so many different types of experiences in the military and in linguistics and engineering and neuroscience. And just maybe if you can say a few words about what got you so fascinated about learning in your personal and professional experience.
Oh gosh, that's a, why do you ask the tough questions under the guise of being easy? It's kind of funny. If you ever look at those old Jackie Chan movies, and like he'll be between 2 trucks that are zooming by, and you see the look on his face, and it's like fear, total fear. And apparently that's how he really feels inside. He does all these incredible stunts, but he's terrified when he's doing them. And I kind of feel a little like Jackie Chan. I'm like, oh, I've got a chance to go to the South Pole. Well, let's do it. But I'm terrified. And so I go down there and I'm terrified while doing it, or join the army, or, go work up on the Bering Sea with the Russians or whatever. And I'm just a perfectly normal person. I'm kind of fearful of jumping into something that's completely new and different. But I think that really helps to help you grow as a person. If you can overcome that fear and just kind of do it, even though you feel uncomfortable, and kind of get comfortable with the discomfort, that your life really expands and it turns into something really interesting and in the long term really fun.
That sounds like a good answer to a tough question. So let's dive in. I think one of the key terms that we hear a lot, and a lot of the audience we have here today are educators and digital leaders, is about lifelong learning. And I wanted to ask you if you see a difference in the way we learn throughout our lifetime, And can we lose the ability to learn well? Is it something like a muscle that we need to keep in good shape and with continuous practice, or is it just something that you can pick up even if you let it go for a few years? What do you think?
Oh, well, we were just talking earlier about, I've been brushing up on my Russian, which has gotten very rusty over the years. But I think the sports analogy is a very good one. If you think about it, even when you're 60 years old, 70, and you've never been a real sports person, you can still become better. And are you going to become a world-class athlete? Probably not. But are you going to become a lot better than what you were? Absolutely. And what we find, though, is, I mean, have you ever met these older people and they're really rigid and they're set in their ways and they're always thinking they're right? Well, I don't want to be.
Never met such a person.
I don't want to be like that person. And I think one of the ways to avoid being like that person who's very rigid is to help keep yourself flexible through learning. And and there's all sorts of positive research evidence that shows that what learning can do is it serves like a trellis, that new neurons, as they're being born in your hippocampus and elsewhere, they have a trellis to grow on if you're trying to learn something. If you're not learning anything new, they'll just kind of die away. But if you're learning something new, they've got something to kind of hang on, and that actually promotes mental health. You have a more positive attitude or a mental mood, in part because of neurogenesis. That is, these new neurons, they help you to learn these new things. And I find if I'm really work all the time, I kind of get a little down. And once I say, no, I'm going to take my time to learn a little bit of something about the Neanderthals, or learn a little bit about causal analysis in mathematics, all of a sudden I start getting a little happier if I start devoting just a little time each day to that. And I think it's the neurogenesis. So there's lots of evidence that lifelong learning is very helpful for you all the way up until your deathbed.
That's actually fascinating. You're saying that learning new things, the neurogenesis that happens through learning, might actually prevent burnout or reduce stress, or just make you generally a happier person, which is amazing.
Right. And part of what it is, like, there are certain chemotherapies that what these chemotherapies do is they stop the growth of new cells, which is a good thing for cancer. But it also stops the growth of new cells in the brain. And what they often find is that these individuals become depressed because they're not having that neurogenesis. Whereas if you can let the normal unfolding of neurogenesis occur and then promote and encourage it by learning something new, it really does a lot to prevent anxiety, prevent depression, or alleviate depression and other kinds of mood disorders.
That's really interesting. Maybe we can take a step further into how the learning actually happens, because I think one of the biggest challenges in learning is probably not only remembering information for a test or in the short term, but also taking that knowledge with me in the longer term. So maybe you can say a few words about how our memory works and what are the limitations of our memory that might hurt our ability to learn new things.
Well, you know what I'd like to do? Let me share my screen for just a moment. And so what we're going to do for this test is I'm going to read some sentences to you. And what your goal is, I'm going to read 8 sentences, and the sentences will appear on the screen. And your goal will be to remember the last word of each sentence. And what you're going to do is you're going to enter these words into that screen, but you can't write it down. If you do, it's not going to give accurate results, and it's not going to help you or us. So here's our test. Here's an example. So don't remember this stuff. And he was reading a blue book. So you would remember the word book. And then 14 people were inside the supermarket. You would remember the word supermarket. But now you've got a feel for it. So wipe your memory clean, and I'm going to read you the 8 sentences. And your goal is not to write anything down, but remember as many as you can of those 8 words so that you can enter them in here. So here's the first one. Come back here. No. We had been waiting for a long time. Why is this? It was interesting, but difficult to understand. No one was carrying a backpack. We had just arrived when it started to rain. The office was just a small room. The coffee arrived late and it was cold. There were many bushes in the garden. He asked and he asked, but received no offer. So there we go. There's our, oops. So we're gonna go back up here, whoops, and enter your information in there. And let's see what we're getting. Hopefully we're getting some. 1. Oh, it's coming in.
Okay, everyone should be entering the last word of each sentence, as many as you can remember, into the link that was.
So we've got 37, 38, 39 people. Okay.
We have almost 400 people here, so come on, start remembering words.
It's coming. Okay. What a great audience. Okay. We're at 110. Okay, it's growing. I have to give it just another few moments here because they're pouring in now. The audience participation is overwhelming. So
maybe you can say a word about empty bookshelves now.
Oh yes. Okay. So I like to joke that, everybody always has bookcases with books in the background. And I just thought I would change it up and just bookcases without books. So it's like new learning, but actually I'm moving. So my hubby and I are moving to South Dakota. So it's going to be fun. And oh, look at this, because that's where our daughter is a pediatrician. So we're going to be close to, okay. So I think okay. Is everybody ready?
Yes, let's see the results.
Okay, so here we go. There we go. That's our results here. Hopefully you can see them.
We're not seeing them yet.
Okay, let me stop share and I will start a new share.
So what are we going to see now? Are we going to see the number of words that everyone remembered?
You're going to see a histogram. Hopefully you're seeing it now, I hope.
I can see it.
Of how many words the audience was able to remember. Mm-hmm. And you can see look, it's this histogram of, okay, there's the group who didn't drink coffee in the morning. So, okay. And so actually I can be in the 0 to 1 range pretty easily. In fact, I was telling Talia, one of my most embarrassing moments was speaking with Saul Khan at Khan Academy. And he asked me a question that had a couple parts to it. And so of course I forgot the second part, you know, when I was speaking with him because I was distracted by answering the first part. And so he said, well, okay, yeah, but you didn't answer the second question. And I said, well, I don't have a good working memory, so I forgot it. And he's like, yeah, that's so funny. Okay, go ahead and answer. And I was like, and then he looks at me and says, you were serious, weren't you? And I was serious. It was sad. But as you can see, there's quite a distribution. And the thing I really want to point out here is that having exceptionally high working memory can be an advantage, can also be a disadvantage. And similarly, having a low capacity working memory can be a disadvantage sometimes, but it can also be very advantageous sometimes. And the reason for that is, and look at this too. See, look at it, it kind of, the average, it sort of centers around 5 if you don't count the zeros. And we're not sure if the zeros are, you know, they just weren't focusing, or if they didn't have their coffee, or if it's truly a 0. On average, people tend to be about 4 things. They can hold 4 pieces of information, as with the last word in that sentence. And that's exactly what we're seeing here is, you know, on average is probably around a 4. But it's, you know, this is Israel, you know, there's lots of smart people here. So maybe 5 is more likely. But let's see, so let us.
Can you say more about why it might be a disadvantage to have a good working memory? That sounds interesting.
Oh yes, I sure can. So actually my hero in science is a fellow named Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And Cajal said, I mean, part of the reason he's my hero is because he too had a very bad working memory. He really struggled to learn things and to try to, you know, even memorizing things was very difficult for him. He was an artist, he liked to draw, but he flunked out of school, he was kicked out of school, he was just a terrible, terrible student. And he didn't start even trying to learn math seriously until he was almost 20. And then he was regretting that he hadn't tried earlier. But Cajal, he became a professor of anatomy. And I mean, he flunked the test 2 times, and the 3rd time he passed. So he became a professor of anatomy. Then he went on, and his research was so fantastic, he won the Nobel Prize. And then that wasn't enough. He's now known as the father of modern neuroscience. And what Cajal said, so remember, Cajal did not have a big working memory. He said that he himself was no genius, and it's clear he was not. But he said, I have worked with many geniuses. And the problem with geniuses is that they can learn so quickly and so easily that they don't get used to being wrong. They become inflexible. And when they are wrong, instead of just saying, you know, I'm wrong, I got to retread here, they will actually just use their intellect to somehow find some way to justify why they must have been right after all. And this, in fact, is one of the biggest impediments in science, is people will come up with innovative, good ideas, and all the geniuses will be like, oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, we know that stress is what causes ulcers. Of course, it doesn't. And when Barry Marshall showed that it's actually a bacteria that causes ulcers, all these really smart genius types were quick to jump on him and say, no, it's stress. Don't be ridiculous. And so Barry Marshall had to actually swallow some H. pylori bacteria and give himself ulcers as a consequence in order to prove that actually, yes, it is bacteria that cause ulcers. He also got really bad breath. So I think his wife deserves some.
Terrible story.
But anyway, a big problem with those who have really exceptional working memories is that they can become very, very inflexible. And you will use that intellect to justify why you must be flexible after all. And you'll find ways to do that, even though people around you are going, oh yeah, that's Fred exactly to a T. So, but the advantage to lower capacity working memory is that you can be very creative. In fact, sometimes you can be more creative than the person with the big working memory. And why is that? So it's like, well, okay, you get the stuff in mind, get it in mind. Ooh, shiny, you get distracted, something falls out of working memory. Well, when something falls out, something else comes back in, and that something else is creative. It's these creative ideas that you just can't suppress. So indeed, there's good evidence that those with lower capacity working memory are more creative. And they also, they have to use long-term memory to be able to handle big chunks of information. So they have to get it up in there. It takes some work to do that. But once they get it in there, long-term memory can like compact and refine and make it more elegant. So the person with the smaller working memory comes out with these elegant and simple solutions that the person with the high capacity working memory just can't see, because after all, they can hold everything in mind. So this complex way of doing things is good enough for them. And so this is why I think even on teams, it's important to have not only a bunch of people who have high capacity working memory, but also a variety, because it's, those lower capacity are going to be very creative.
So actually something that's really interesting to think about smaller, shorter working memory as an opportunity for more creativity and also to make mistakes, which are a very important part of learning. And if we try to go back to talking about the digital learning world, what would you say are the one or two biggest mistakes that education systems or universities make when they try to move to the digital world or start using digital learning?
Well, I think stepping back, before we even talk about digital learning, I'm going to be a bit provocative here and say, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in education as a whole is listening to really, really smart people, because they tend to have this sense that everybody learns just like they do. And what they often want to do is set up educational systems that would work really well for them to learn with. But it doesn't work, it works well for those with very high capacity working memory, but it doesn't work well at all for those with lower capacity working memory. And these tend to be the more creative people in society. So I think you have to be really, really careful that the educational system is not geared to the race car learners. That you need to be more cognizant of the fact that people with lower capacity working memory learn differently. They need more practice. They learn procedurally more. So that means lots and lots of practice with things, but then they can learn it even better. And a lot of times that means having instructors give insight and then having the students practice, as opposed to a much more student-centered learning where it's like, here you go, you guys figure it out, which constructivists often say they don't do this, but they often do this, at least in many schools that aren't really cognizant that that's important to give both explicit instruction and student-centered active learning approaches. But in the digital world, again, I think a big challenge is that we listen to experts about how bad online learning is. But if you look at some of those experts and the type of online teaching they do, how can I put this? It's not very good. It's like really bad. So of course they think that online learning is not a good way to teach other people because they're very used to having students trapped in a classroom. And so, yeah, you can teach no matter if you just stand there and talk to them for 2 hours, maybe with a chalkboard, you've got them trapped in there. But online, you can lose them much more easily. So you need to be more intelligent about how you design your online learning so that it's more engaging. And that's harder to do. And so many experts would much rather default to the idea of, no, we don't need to have this newfangled online learning stuff. Let's trap them in the classroom. That's the best way to go. And I think that the online world is just ripe for great strides now as people are learning with COVID that it's important to be able to teach online. And indeed, it can be done. And we just need to be more focused on engaging our students. And sometimes this drives me crazy, I'll tell you. The people will say, we want our students to be engaged. We want them to be engaged. We're going to have discussion forums. They're going to have peer evaluations. We need them, talking to one another. And then they just like toss this stuff, like a bunch of documents online and expect students to read it. And they don't actually take care with creating good videos. And we know from videos that it's one of the best ways for people to learn, because if your working memory isn't that big, you can hold some in audio, some information in visual, and you can learn faster from watching a good video than you can from, for example, just reading a document. So I think that if we can just bear all of this in mind, it's possible to make things that are much more engaging. And the first thing you want to do to get your students engaged is to create engaging videos, which is like the last thing that often happens in many online courses.
So I want to ask you about that, because something you bring up is that people who are critical about online learning sometimes don't create high quality content. And I want to ask you, because many of the critics are looking at completion rates and retention in MOOCs and in online courses. And I'm sure a lot of our audience are educators in the digital age and are faced with this challenge of retention and completion. And the critics always say, the retention rates are very low, the completion rates are very low. Why do you think it's so hard to complete an online course? And what are your suggestions for learners and educators in terms of helping individuals go through that challenge?
That's a very penetrating question. I think that part of the problem, this is a multifaceted problem. For one thing, remember that critics of online learning have vested interests. I mean, many college professors would very much prefer that online learning disappear entirely because it provides competition to them. So there's a vested interest in criticizing no matter what. I would say that if you really want to have a fair comparison, then put up something, a online course that charges the same amount as a university charges for their course, have both people pay, and then compare what the retention rates are. And I would suspect they would be quite similar. Online courses are free, at least to start with. And so what people misleadingly do is they'll say, well, it's like going into a bookstore. You look at a book on a shelf and you put it back because it didn't meet your needs or whatever. Well, we don't have a number for that, how many people put a book back on a bookshelf. In fact, we don't even have numbers for how many books are actually completed. And my guess is if you look at textbooks and the completion rate of textbooks, it's probably even lower than the completion rate of MOOCs. So, I mean, by the standards of MOOC critics, that should mean that we get rid of all textbooks. So that's clearly not going to happen. But
so you're actually saying that maybe a prior commitment is something that helps the chances for completing something, right? Either a book or a course. Are there other things that might help people in thinking about, if I really want to learn something, what will get me through that?
Oh, there's so many ways to help yourself improve. And I think we see the bottom line is motivation, your internal motivation. And I think that one thing I'd love to see is that we do more to help students learn how to motivate themselves. And a lot of times productivity tricks will work with completion of MOOCs. It's simple. I'm going to set aside a certain amount of time each day. That's a really productive way of helping students to complete MOOCs. I do Duolingo. I practice with them. I check off each day that I do a Duolingo, and I now have over a year of I've done every single day. So you can make a little calendar for yourself and put a little X each day that you have done some progress towards whatever your learning goal is. And research has shown that this idea of sequencing, that you're trying to keep a run going, is actually one of the most powerful tools that we can give. Even Jerry Seinfeld said, what is one of the best ways to help you become a better comedian? And it was to write a joke every day, and you cross it off on the calendar. So I think these calendar sequential commitments are, a really good tool. So developing, you don't have to be a super motivated person. You just have to learn and start practicing a few little motivational tricks, and that will get you on the path to success.
So that's great. You're talking about kind of a daily schedule, and that brings me to another topic that you talk a lot about in your course, which is chunking and trying to break down big topics into very small pieces of information or knowledge. And it has many names like micro learning or nano courses or a lot of these buzzwords that we're hearing a lot. And what I'm wondering is whether you think these very short pieces of learning content might also impact our ability to go deeply into a topic, or to reach a level of mastery of a discipline, or to be able to synthesize information from different topics and areas. And how do you see that in terms of chunking versus having a well-rounded education?
That's such a good question, because I think there's trade-offs either way. I think that learning lots of things, even if superficially, helps keep you more broadly situated in your knowledge base. And that can be helpful, even if at the time it seems like you're just learning something extraneous. But I do think, it depends on your own learning goals and so forth. But it's also really helpful. And I think universities do a good job of trying to lead people towards learning something in depth. And so keeping up with that through your life, if you say study medicine or something of that nature, that can be so encompassing that it can be hard to learn things outside your field. But I think there's just trade-offs either way. Where we have to be careful, I think, is spending too much time on social media. And there's plenty of evidence, a little bit is not, it can be a good thing. I like getting emails that inform me of latest research. I like, but on the other hand, you can just get really demoralized and depressed, especially if the newspapers are always focusing, if it bleeds, it leads, and so forth. So staying a little bit away from social media and too much focus on negative news can really help you pick up your mood.
That's a good tip. Actually, I think that's also a complex topic, because I find that a lot of my professional learning happens on social media and in different, learning communities. That's also hard to kind of separate the learning and the professional world from news and just mindless browsing and other things. So that's a good food for thought. It seems like time is flying by, and I really want to maybe ask you one question about the future, a few years from now. What do you think is going to happen in terms of what universities and colleges are going to look like? What is learning going to be like? I think you missed the first video, which I thought was a great video in Hebrew about, it was kind of a look into the future of what digital learning or personalized learning is going to look like in teachers' colleges, teacher training colleges.
Oh, wow.
What are your thoughts? And maybe I'll send you a translation later, because I think it's a really great video. What are your thoughts about the future of higher education?
I spoke at Sam Houston University in Texas, and they, some years back, decided to go largely online. And where many universities in Texas are struggling, in fact, around the US are struggling, Sam Houston has just exploded. And so I think the smart universities are really placing much more of their bets on online learning. And now it's becoming more apparent to everybody that that's a good thing to do. But what I wish that we would see more of is, for example, the wonderful activities at Georgia Tech for their masters in data analysis, where they have used economies of scale to really reduce the costs of online learning, of getting a good education. And they're showing that their graduates are perfectly comparable to the face-to-face, but at like, a fifth the cost. So I think if universities can move in that direction, and there's plenty of evidence, for example, Stanford Online Learning High School or the Stanford Online High School is excellent in K-12 realm. So I think there's plenty of, but just watch that you're making truly engaging materials in the sense of accompanied by great and sometimes difficult to create videos.
Wonderful. So maybe we can take one or two questions from the audience.
Yes, I picked two questions. I apologize to all the people here that I couldn't take their questions. So Barbara, two last questions from the audience, and hopefully two is not that many that we can hold it in our working memory. One
time.
let's see. One is, I'll ask the two questions together, and let's see if you can address. One is maybe elaborate a bit more about what makes engagement. What is engagement in digital learning? What is it in a video that is engaging in comparison to a video which is not engaging? And one more big question is about the day after COVID-19. Will we be back at where we started before the pandemic? What will we take from this period? What will we prefer to forget? Did we really have a big jump this year, or is it just our impression at the moment, and a day after people would want to go back to where we started before? So these are the two questions.
Good questions. Let's see if I can answer them succinctly. Engagement. So people often say that if you're listening to a lecture, for example, that it's passive learning. Mm-hmm. But think about it. If you are really thinking about what that person is saying, you are actively trying to engage with that material. the thing is, we can only do that for so long before our mind just starts to, I mean, unless you're Einstein or something, your mind will go off. So part of what makes engagement is you're having that student actually think about difficult material and accompanying you in that journey. Sometimes the only way you can do that is give a little explanation and then have the student actively doing something. So in that sense, it's like Julius Jaego with learning how to throw the javelin. He became the world champion by watching YouTube videos, but he would intensely engage by watching the video. Then he'd go off and practice. So engagement it means keeping students' attention through whatever trick you can. And there's lots of tricks, and I could give you a good 2-hour talk about that. Oh, I'd love to do that. But keep their attention and then have them actively practice with what they're learning. Retrieval practice is where it's at. So now I'm checking my list. Okay, so back before, I think the longer that the COVID experiment, call it, goes on, the more that we will see incremental changes in the long term. I don't think we'll ever quite go back to where we were before, but there will be a big push to just go right back into the same direction. But I think that visionaries, if we have visionary leadership, they will also see the need that we need to be building out in 2 ways. Naturally improving face-to-face instruction, but there is just a big need for improvement in online forms of engaging students and teaching students. So I'm hoping that we've got a jump start, that we've moved several decades ahead. I mean, if something good comes out of the COVID disaster, that would be a good thing to come out of it, is just that we, start building up our capacity in this way as well. So, but we will see what happens. Hopefully next year, we'll see it going back to more of a normal life, at least.
Barb, maybe one sentence, if you can give one tip for change makers in the digital learning space. Many of them are here with us today. What would you suggest?
Oh, use insights from neuroscience and try to teach so that you reach people both with high capacity working memories and low capacity working memories. You need all of them, and a great educational system is going to not just teach to the ones who are swift learners, but to all students. So, the more you understand of neuroscience about those kinds of things, and my book is coming out with Terry Sanowski, who's one of the world's bestest neuroscientists. He's one of only 12 living human beings who is simultaneously a member of the National Academy of Sciences, of Medicine and Engineering, and it has some phenomenal insight into how to teach better based on, I should mention the name, Uncommon Sense Teaching is the name of the book. So.
I can't wait to read it, and I want to thank you so much for being with us today. It was a pleasure for me to learn from you, as always. And Gudon, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, both of you, Barbara and Talia. It was fascinating, and I think it was important. I can take maybe two quick takeaways from this session, and maybe more parts that we had today. One is really the importance of neuroscience and the science of learning. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about learning or digital learning. We probably can't start talking about digital learning without better understanding the science of learning and understanding that today it's all open. It's easy to learn the science of learning. It's not a secret anymore. And we should all do it if we want to be learning professionals. And maybe the other takeaway would be that this is an amazing time and a potential for a big momentum. And all of us leaders in the world of digital learning should be these visionary people that Barbara talked about, and not let the crowd take us back to where we've been a year ago. It would be such a shame. So Barbara, I hope you have a few more minutes to go over the chats and see all the things people just wrote down to you. And I want to thank everybody for attending here today. It was a great learning celebration for all of us. We will send the recordings to all the people who registered, and we will add the subtitles in the parts where it was missing. Thank you so much for everybody. And good morning to you, Barbara.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Talia.
I hope to see you again soon.
I hope so too.
Thank you, Talia, for moderating this.
Happy to.
תודה רבה לכולם, להתראות.